I asked a couple of my friends, and they scratched their heads before saying no. Story 1. I actually have, and it is nice. My current girlfriend would ask if it was okay before initiating early in our relationship. After 3 or 4 times, I was comfortable enough that I told her not to worry about asking, and I'd let her know to stop if I wanted that. Story 2. I told a woman I didn't want to have sex without a condom. She was on top and said, "Don't worry," which I took to mean she didn't want either. She then pushed my penis back and sat down on it. I pushed her off and said, "What the F?" Yet, according to British law, I wasn't raped, as that would be impossible for a woman to do to me. Story 3. Literally never happened. It's understood that when we talk about consent, it's just getting consent from women. But officially, we have to pretend it's equal. Story 4. Every 5 minutes, I can barely finish reading the website's title before they're asking for cookies and subscriptions. Do you mind if I send you spam? They're going to send it anyway. Story 5. Never. That's why instead of rejecting women, I just play dumb if I'm not interested. Oh, he didn't get the hint. Oh no, I did get it, it's just that I didn't want to deal with it. Story 6. I've had many consent conversations before sex. In those cases, both of us talked about what we are comfortable with, what we enjoy, what our boundaries are, and so on. Those conversations were usually with clothes on, mostly sober, and occasionally not even on the same night as the sex we were discussing. In the moment, though, I can only think of one partner who was very keen on making sure I was into everything that was happening. She asked about each thing before we did it. Story 7. Honestly, never. It seems to just be an assumption that I am good to go. I did not care in my 20s, but in my 40s, I really started to notice this double standard. Story 8. Pretty often, but not in the awkward, "May I have your consent for sexual intercourse?" way that some people imagine. It's usually more like, "Do you want to try this?" Or, "Do you want to play this weekend?" Of course, my experience is a bit out there since I'm in the bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism scene, and it's practically impossible to engage in these activities without discussing them first. Imagine what would happen if we didn't use our words. Person A shows up with a length of rope, a marker, and a wooden spoon. Person B shows up with a ginger root, 3 sex toys, and a tub of ice cubes. Neither of them knows what the other is expecting. It wouldn't work out. Story 9. I don't think I've ever been asked for consent. But to be fair, I'm the one doing the initiating 90% of the time, so it mostly isn't relevant. I've also been in a monogamous relationship with the same person for the last 20 years, so explicitly asking for consent is quite rare for us. Story 10. A couple of times when my then-girlfriend asked me if I wanted to receive oral. One time I said something along the lines of, "Ah, not this time. I really want to go down on you right now." She seemed a little relieved. Afterwards, we talked, and it turns out she didn't really like doing it but did it anyway because she thought that's what a girlfriend is supposed to do. But because it didn't do much for me anyway, and even less when I learned she wasn't into it, we just dropped it from our activities. But sure, I've had my butt grabbed by strangers in bars, and they didn't bother asking me for consent first. So, I guess I've been fairly lucky. Story 11. As I repelled women generally when I was single, it really didn't matter. Someone has to want to engage with you before consent even factors in. I initiate all sexual acts with my wife and my girlfriend, so it's never been a concern. I honestly would love to have either of them actually start sexual encounters, but I've never had that experience with any women in 40 years, so it's probably not going to start now. Story 12. My ex-girlfriend tried to take my virginity when I was 21. We had been dating for about 4 or 5 months, and I was happy and content. She asked if we could have sex while she was sitting on top of me, and I said I wasn't comfortable with that. She tried a little harder to get my pants off, and I made some excuse to walk the dog or something. Story 13. Literally never. But that itself isn't the issue. Humans communicate non-verbally, and 95% of the time, that is how we communicate consent. So this effort to weaponize "you didn't ask for consent" ignores the reality of human interaction. My wife has never asked for consent either. Story 14. Never. But it's also funny how apparently I should be okay, no, feel special if I get touched or harassed because I'm the guy. Strange phenomenon, isn't it? Story 15. I was asked once recently, playing a gig, and at the end, a woman came up to me and asked, "Can I give you a kiss?" I said, "Sure," feeling a little on the spot as I'm happily married, and then she kissed me on the cheek. No biggie. About 6 months later, I saw her again at a gig with another band I was playing with, and she was talking to some mutual friends. I went over and said something like, "Hi, we met before." And she immediately said, "Yes, I asked you for a kiss. I'm so embarrassed, at least I got your consent." And it occurred to me that this was a very modern interaction and not one I've ever had before. Story 16. Typically, I've been with women who are into dirty talk, so consent is usually requested or implied through that, or at least a declaration of what is about to happen, which gives an opportunity for either party to refuse. I've only ever been explicitly asked, "Do you consent?" in those exact words once, and I burst out laughing because it was so unexpected. She said it in a really stilted way mid-makeout, and she was already straddling me. Felt like I had been dropped into a sex education video. Story 17. I think once it was with someone who themselves were not amazing with sex comfort-wise, so we took everything in small steps. We were dating for about 8 months, so there was rapport there too. I really appreciated her care since I have definitely been forced to continue before. Story 18. It depends on the circumstances. But plenty of times I've gotten the "want to have sex?" or "let's go home" with a look that says it all. The most amusing part is when you respond with, "I'm not in the mood," and watch their brain break as they try to comprehend it. That said, in a relationship at least, it isn't hard to figure out where actions are leading. It's easy to shut it down if you really aren't into it at the moment. Story 19. This is funny. The only woman who is good at using consent language is my current girlfriend. She was sex trafficked many years ago, so you might imagine that consent is very important to her. Story 20. I was molested for a short time by a young woman when I was very young. I've told therapists, friends, teachers, and my parents. Literally, not one person gave a solitary care. The response is, "You're a guy. You liked it, really?" Story 21. It's never happened. Meanwhile, I've been careful to ask if this is what they want and if they're sure beforehand in my encounters when initiating. I also was sexually assaulted by a former friend of mine. I think that men get villainized for being these monsters who take whatever they want from women. The reality is most female-initiated sexual assault just goes unreported because it typically isn't taken seriously. Story 22. The last 2 people I have dated have been very considerate and respectful. It was not uncommon for them to ask whether they could touch, hug, or kiss me. It might sound weird, but I am very visibly very shy. Other than those 2, there have been a handful of times where I wished they would ask for consent, but they did not. And they did not care. That is how I lost my virginity. Story 23. I have been frequently asked for consent by women in their 20s. I have never been asked for consent by women older than that. There have also been a few times that I verbally asked for consent when doing things with women in their 40s or older, and they looked at me like I was crazy. It feels like a generational thing to me, and in my opinion, the 20-year-olds have it right. Story 24. Once in the 90s, on my first prom night with my girlfriend, I said no. She said if I didn't, she would break up with me and tell everyone I was gay and had a small penis. I relented. 0 out of 10 would not do again. Story 25. Never been raped a few times and sexually assaulted hundreds of times, though. The funniest time was with this girl who I had invited over for a second date. I told her early on during the night that I didn't want to have sex, just so she didn't get disappointed or anything, which was totally cool with her. That was until a few hours later when I awoke in a complete daze of her riding me. Thankfully, I lost consciousness again after a few seconds, and when I awoke the next day, she at least had left my place. Story 26. Wow, this is a really interesting question. I cannot recall one time. I do not know if it is considered rape, but when I was a kid, my mom's friend knew I was going through puberty and was in my couch humping phase, and she leaned into that. She never asked me if it was okay. I was 12, but for some reason I could not even think of saying no. Also, I've never brought it up to the boys or my wife because everyone would look at me like I am weak. Masculine culture is difficult to navigate, but it is also not all our fault for being born a straight male. Disagree if you want, but no woman ever asked me if it was okay to be intimate. Story 27. What are you asking? Has anyone ever been with me without asking? No, every woman I've been with has asked before initiating sex. No woman has ever forced anything on me. If you mean has somebody asked, do you consent to sexual activity like a robot? Then no. But then again, I've never had to ask in such an imprecise, clumsy way either. Plenty of forms of nonverbal communication are far more precise, obvious, and affirmative regarding consent than literally speaking the words. Story 28. There was one time I remember where a girl just had this look on her face like she wanted to say something, and I asked her, "What is it?" And she said, "I wanted to ask you if I could be intimate with you." And it was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. And afterwards, she didn't have to ask me if she could be more intimate with me. Story 29. When I was 11, my family moved to a new state, and the girl in the neighboring house, who was my age or maybe a year older, kept inviting herself over to swim in our pool. I got sick of it because she was constantly trying to grope me. She would just start rubbing me inappropriately. I was embarrassed and could only tell my parents that I didn't like having her over, but they probably thought I was in my girls are icky stage and thought it was cute that a girl liked me. One day she said she needed my help with something at her house. We walked over, and I realized her parents weren't home. I got a really bad feeling and just turned around and left. First, I wish I had told my parents, not just for my own sake, but because there's about a 99% chance she had been or was being sexually abused. The signs were all there, and I didn't know them then. Second, I'm pretty sure she's the reason that I got bullied for being gay the rest of middle and high school. It's not lost on me that the entire scenario is one that most boys, including myself, fantasize about. A cute, ready-to-go neighbor that can't keep their hands off you. Reality is something else. Story 30. I got asked over the weekend for the first time ever in my 42 years. I was chatting with this woman, and she said, "I want to kiss you, okay?" Just less than 2 weeks prior, I was talking with another woman. She was interested in me, but I wasn't interested in her. As I was walking back to my seat after getting another drink, she suddenly grabbed and squeezed my behind with both hands. Story 31. Actually, quite often. Most of the girls I have been with have grabbed my penis and asked, "Is this okay?" before stroking my penis. That being said, there was one girl who did not take no for an answer. 3 years of therapy helped me get over that, though. Story 32. What usually happens if you don't give consent? They become upset and feel like they are not good enough. You're accused of being gay or of cheating. There's something wrong with the relationship. Or the truth is we're not in the mood. We're tired. Not feeling well. We're not machines. Story 33. The one time I rejected a girlfriend because I had the flu, I was accused of being a jerk. She cheated on me regularly, and I had zero self-worth, so it continued for years after that point. When I lost my virginity with a different girlfriend, she was actually wonderful about it. We spent a good amount of time leading up to it, but she very thoroughly verified that I was absolutely certain that I wanted to do it, not teasing or joking. She was a sweet person. Story 34. Once I went out with a guy, and at the end of our hangout, I asked him if he wanted to kiss or make out. He was so shocked and said, "No one has ever asked me that before." Now, I always ask men. Story 35. Once, out of more times than I care to count, my current girlfriend stressed to me that my consent matters too, and I had every right to retract it at any moment. Needless to say, she's a hardcore keeper, and I love her so much. Story 36. You are addressing a significant problem. Women have been complaining about double standards for a long time, and now men are experiencing its negative effects. Unfortunately, these are not always the same men who deserve it. Story 37. I'm a woman, but my friend, who's a man, was sexually assaulted by a female who refused to understand or acknowledge his body language and talked him into sex and performing oral sex on him, even though he was not interested and became unresponsive during the act. He didn't think it was a big deal, but I reminded him that it was, because consent is just as important for a man as it is for a woman, and I don't want him thinking it doesn't matter. Story 38. To be honest, as a woman, I've never vocally asked, do I have your consent to? I just always go off physical cues and what's going on in the moment. But I do not and did not expect to be asked for consent verbally from my past partners or current partner. I don't think I've ever been asked either, other than maybe if you count my first boyfriend asking if he could kiss me. Story 39. Interestingly enough, I have been at a swinger club and been lying naked on a bed playing with someone and was asked by a lady if she could touch me. At the same club, I have been standing talking to people, fully clothed, on the main area by the bar and dance floor as the night was ending, and a woman came up to me and told me she liked how I looked as she grabbed my crotch and said something about us playing together next time. Personally, and especially in that setting, it didn't bother me, and to be honest, I liked the attention. However, I understand that someone else, male or female, could have had a completely different response to it, and that what she did was very inappropriate regardless of the setting.